What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and today we're doing things a little differently. I'm going to talk a little slower. The words will be a little more measured, simply because we're talking about something that's very serious and very important to me, right? Like, we're going to talk about the future of Pokemon investing and what types of returns we might be able to expect. Now, let me say this first. Let me say it loud and proud. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future. Neither do you. Neither does your favorite YouTuber or any talking head on TV or Wall Street pundit. None of us know what's going to happen, but what I can say definitively is I have a lot of experience, and experience is a very valuable thing to possess. So I have been collecting high-end cards for 20 years now, right? Like, I remember 20 years ago when I got my very first PSA slab in the mail, I fell in absolute love with it. And over those 20 years, I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot happen in the world. I've seen a lot happen here in the US. I've seen a lot happen in the card markets. And when I'm thinking about what the future might hold here in the TCG space, I take all of those learnings. Like, I always find it incredibly important to take the lessons from the past and apply them to the future to hopefully give us some idea of what might happen. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share a couple graphs with you, which is going to show the actual stock market versus card comparison from 2008 all the way to the end of 2022. Now, I will say this as well at the beginning of this video. I always prioritize my stock market investing over my Pokemon card collecting, over my sports card collecting. Like, I think there's no safer investment than the US stock market. It has highs, it has lows, but over the last 200 years, you'd be hard pressed to find a better investment. So I prioritize that, and I probably want to have around 15, 20, maybe 25% of my overall net worth here in the alternative asset class, which is going to be sports cards and Pokemon cards. Now, that is a big percentage, right? So that tells you how much faith and conviction I have here in this space. But again, you know, I have been doing it for a long time. And again, a couple years ago, I just felt like all the momentum was in the TCG space. And that's why I'm here now. And that's why I'm fully invested and happy to continue to be investing in the space. So when I say that focus beyond the cards here, like, some of the things I want to talk about is at this point where we're at right now, a lot of these pandemic factors have really worked themselves out. Now, that doesn't mean COVID has gone away. Like, I work in a space where we have employees all over the place and we still have people calling out with COVID, you know, but the businesses being shut down and the travel restrictions, and there's just a lot of those factors that have worked themselves out. So now we're starting to see the card prices, which were at the pandemic highs, starting to come back down, and that's okay. We need that normalization. The other thing is, remember, the overall economy is going to have a play on the price and the price appreciation of your cards. Now, some of the things is we've seen some really strong job reports as of late. I think in January we added like 350,000 jobs here to the US economy, which is a really strong January report. You know, inflation is coming down. Now, again, inflation has all kinds of factors to it. Just because your gallon of milk isn't coming down in price, that doesn't mean that overall inflation isn't coming down. It's coming down so much that the Fed recently said, hey, we might have up to 3 rate cuts this year. So when rates are cut, that means mortgage rates come down, car rates come down. Like, that is good. It makes some of these big purchases more accessible to people like you and me, right? Like, I think mortgages right now are in the high 6s, low 7%, which is absolutely crazy. And then the other thing that's really interesting, and I read about this the other day, is now the US GDP is on track to hit the pre-pandemic trend, right? So obviously the GDP for the US was on a certain path, then the pandemic hit and it absolutely fell off a cliff. But now it has recovered so much that, forget about the little dip in the urn right there. It is actually on pace to be where we thought it would have been pre-pandemic, which is really, really encouraging and really, really exciting. And the other thing, unless you're sleeping under a rock, everybody knows the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, is back to hitting all-time highs. Now, really good for those of us who are invested in the stock market, but traditionally when you see those S&P 500 and those Dow Jones Industrial all-time highs being hit, that's not always good news for the cardboard space, right? Cardboard space is an alternative asset, and a lot of times when you see the stock market price come down, people start to turn their attention to alternative assets, and that's when you see these price appreciations. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Now, remember, I told you the graphs we're going to look at are from 2008 to 2022, the very end of that year. It's something important to call out is that from 2009 to 2020, that was the second longest bull market in the history of the United States stock market, right? So you're going to be looking at how stocks have performed versus these cards. So keep that in mind. Now, 1987 to 2000 was the longest, but I'm telling you, you're splitting hairs there. It's a matter of months. That's the only difference between the two right there. And I don't know. I'm not sitting here saying we're going to enter another, you know, multi-year, decade-long bull market. I have no freaking clue if that's what's going to happen. But I do think that the economy is improving. The stock market's obviously doing well. And those are all things that we need to consider as we look at the graphs up ahead. So The first thing that I want to share with you is this is a graph that PWCC put out really at the end of 2022. Now, PWCC is an online auction house and they make their money by running auctions, right? So the higher the final sale price for an auction item, the more money PWCC makes. So they did this graph right here, and the PWCC 500 in the blue there, that is the 500 most valuable sports cards out there. Now, when I say the 500 most valuable sports cards out there, I mean, we're talking about Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, right? Like Honus Wagner. Then you got Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Lou Alcindor, I mean, Wayne Gretzky, the list goes. These are just the rarest of the rare, the oldest of the old, the highest of the highest value. Most of these cards you and I can't even dream about affording, right? And so when you look at how the top 500 cards have performed versus the S&P 500 from 2008 all the way to the end, guess what? The PWCC 500 absolutely murders it, right? But even then, look back. When you look at that blue line versus the red line from 2008 all the way to about 2015, they are pretty much splitting hairs, right? They're pretty much flat. And even if you look at that blue line, the blue line is below that 0% mark all the way through about 2014. Up until 2014, do you actually start to make money? Again, you're thinking of the rarest of the rare, the highest of the high value. It is absolutely crazy. Now, I will say this. What was really fascinating to me when I was putting this video together was I wanted to see if they had updated this graph, because obviously this is a couple years old at this point and I can't find it anywhere. I think PWCC took the whole thing down, because as much as we've seen the price correct here in the sports card or here in the TCG market, it pales in comparison to what we've seen in the sports card space. Like a lot of these ultra premium high-end cards that were going for millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, they have started to really come down. So of course, if you're an auction house and you want to speak to the strength of the sports card hobby versus the stock market, when that blue line starts to crash, you're going to get rid of the evidence. So I can't find this anywhere. Maybe somebody else can, but I looked really, really hard to find an updated one and I couldn't find it. So remember this. Now, the next one that I wanted to talk about right here, we're starting to get into things that I think are a little more relevant to us. So this is the PWCC 101 through 500. So they take those top 100 cards out. Those are your $1 million cards. Those are the high six-figure cards. So now we're getting into the realm of cards that are a little bit more approachable, but I would still say the big majority of us, myself included, can't afford them at this time. Now I am lucky enough that I have some of these cards in my collection, but I bought them again 15, 20 years ago when they were only $400. Now they're going for, I don't know, $15,000, $20,000. It's absolutely insane. But I think this is a good, better indication. We'll talk about the slide that's coming up on the next one, and I think that's an even better one. But when you look at this right here, when you take out those top 100 cards, look at how the blue line has performed versus the red line. So really, it was flat, right? So that the blue line represents the 101 through 500. It was really flat to actually down if you go from 2008 all the way to 2015. And for me, I think we might be entering a period here in the TCG space where we see some flatness, and I don't want this to scare you. I don't want this to be, hey, PikaPikaPapa is saying that we're not going to have any gains here in this space. This is simply a representation of, these are some of the biggest and baddest sports cards around. That sports card collecting has been around for over 100 years. Like, talk about an entrenched Goliath. And even with all of that going for it, you have a multi-year, like almost a 10-year period here where you saw zero gains. So the other interesting thing is, look, we see this little pop here really from 2015 to the end of 2016, but then look what happens again. It flattens out again up until we get the pandemic pump. The sports card market is full of things like this. It goes flat, 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 flat. Something happens externally, and then you see it pop off, and then you see it flatten out again. And that's going to be a theme that I talk about. My theme is going to be, if you want to invest, continue to invest. Because if you miss one of these pumps, if you miss one of these markets, timing when the thing just absolutely shoots off like a scalded rabbit, if you miss just one of those, you are going to miss out on the lion's share of return. So if you truly want to be invested, stay invested. Now, the very next one right here, I think this is a better overall representation of the hobby as a whole, right? Because we still take out those top 100 cards, but now these are cards 101 through 2500. So I think this is a fantastic representation of just the overall hobby. These are cards that you and I and anybody watching this video can afford. But again, when you look at it, look at how flat and look at how underperforming sports cards were compared to the S&P 500, right? Now you look at this from 2008 till the end of 2022. Yes, that PWC 101 through 2500 did outperform the S&P 500, but that is only because of that pandemic pump that happened. Like, I pray we never see another pandemic. There will be macro level economic things that happen which drive up the card prices, but I don't know if we're ever going to see something like that, at least in my lifetime again. That was absolutely unheard of. So when you look at the way these prices have performed, performed over, I don't know, what is that, a 10 years time horizon? That is really, really interesting. And again, one of the things I always talk about on this channel is it's incredibly important to buy the highest grade, most rare card that you can possibly afford with the money you have. And that might sound like a duh moment, but I'm telling you, if you want to buy a certain card and you have to save an extra couple months in order to get it in a PSA 10 versus a PSA 9, I promise you, from a long-term price appreciation standpoint, that PSA 10 is going to do a heck of a lot better for you than a PSA 9. That was one of the lessons I learned really early on, and I am so happy that I did that when I started off 20 years ago. I remember saving for an extra month and a half at times in order to buy a card. It would mean that I didn't buy anything for 3, 4, 5 weeks, even though I really wanted to, because I said, no, I'm going to keep putting away $50 this week, $100 this week, because I don't want that PSA 7. I want that PSA 8, and those are the cards that have just absolutely skyrocketed the value of my collection over time. So really interesting to see the way that things have performed over long periods of time, right? So the next thing I want to say is this. I don't know what the future holds. I really don't. I don't think any of us do. But if somebody were to put a gun to my head and force me into guessing, I do think the economy is going to continue to improve. Again, I'm only talking about here in the US because that's where I live, and I wouldn't say that that's my area of expertise, but I'm certainly competent in the way that, our economy has moved over time. I think that cards individually are going to return to a period of lower returns, but I want to say this as well. I'm not talking about sealed product. I still think sealed product has the opportunity to give us some great returns over time, okay? Because sealed product, the overall population of that is always diminishing. People are always ripping boxes, kids are always ripping it up, things get lost, things get thrown out. Like, that just happens, right? Now, a lot of that happens in the card space as well, but not to the degree that it does in the sealed space. So yes, I think cards are going to flatten out. I think we're going to see one of those periods like we saw, over on a couple of those graphs where we just have, years and years where, for me, it's a great time to be a collector, right? Like, the investing side of things is just a cherry on top of the sundae for me. I love collecting. I love being in the Pokemon space. I love having all these cool things behind me, right? And that's what makes the hobby really enjoyable for me. So it's really inspiring to me that I can enjoy being a collector and also enjoy these moments where my collection value goes through the roof. But again, I am still investing in sealed, and I think sealed is going to do really well even when these singles cards are flat. The other thing I want to say is great sets and great cards will always outperform. Hard stop. This doesn't mean that all cards are going to fall into one bucket. I still think that we will have an amazing Scarlet and Violet set. I don't know when it is. It hasn't come out yet. I think we're going to have an amazing Scarlet and Violet era chase card. Again, I don't know what it is. I don't know when it's going to come out. It certainly hasn't come out yet. But when those come out, they are just going to buck the trend and they're going to outperform. There are always going to be these unicorns out there. It's our job to try and identify them as early as we can and get in on them as the best price possible, because those are the ones that are really going to give us some upside gain in the short run while we're waiting for the long-term gain on a lot of these other ones. I mean, it is just such a fun space to be in, and it's such an awesome joy that we get to do that. The other thing that I believe in is I think the Pokemon Company International is going to have to evolve a bit. I think that they've been doing a lot of the same here for a while. I think they do a great job on the game side of things. I think they introduce new mechanics and they keep it fresh, and with rotation, I think that's great. But I think if they want to continue to build their collector and investor side of things, which I think you can absolutely have both, I think they're going to have to evolve. I know a lot of play card spaces are going to serialize cards. I personally like that. Some people don't. But I think they're going to have to find a way to get some kind of known rarity, right? Like, you think of the Moonbreon, we have no idea how many of them are out there in the wild. Like, I'm always tracking how many PSA 10s have been graded. And, having a definitive number of cards out there really helps drive prices. It helps drive excitement. I mean, even though we didn't know the definitive print run of Pikachu with gray felt hat, it certainly drove a ton of collector interest. I mean, we literally crashed the Pokemon website and people were tearing up a museum trying to get the card. And now the launch of that was an absolute debacle, and that was the wrong way to do it. But I do think that something like that, a card like that, being able to drive that type of excitement is really important. And I think Pokemon Company is going to have to find a way to do that. And I will finish with what I had said in the beginning. If you believe, be invested. Don't try and time the market. Time in market is more valuable than timing the market, right? Like, if anything, I am proof of that. And if this is something you really want to do, even if you want to get out, keep a toe in the water. There have been times where, hey, I haven't been super invested, but I've always kept my toe in the water, and it's served me well in the long run. So if you believe in this, if you enjoy it, if you have fun with it, if it enriches your life, hey, listen, be invested, be happy to be invested, and I promise you that over the long run, you are going to do just fine. So with all that being said, hey, listen, if you enjoyed this content and you made it to the very end, please know how much I appreciate you. I hope you nothing but wealth and prosperity here in the Pokemon space. And if you don't mind and you had value in this, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, or drop a comment down below. I appreciate you more than you know. You all have an epic one. See everybody. Bye.